Have you ever felt overwhelmed by all the things you think you were supposed to be doing as a maker in 2022? Post a reel every day to Instagram. Post multiple reels every day to Instagram. Don't use Etsy. Build your own website. Raise your prices. The world can often feel like it's constantly yelling at us to change something, to fix something, to do something more and more and more. And if you're anything like me, that ever growing to do list is quite frankly impossible. As a solo maker and nearly solo business owner, there isn't enough time in the day or resources available to me to accomplish all of the things that the world is yelling at me to do in order to be, insert air quotes in your mind here as you're listening, quote unquote, successful. So, what if you had a guiding light on how to decide what things on that ever growing list you actually really and truly needed to focus on? What if raising your prices wasn't actually the solution, but lowering them was? It sounds crazy, right? No one has ever said that. But thanks to Sam Lopez's vision for not only how he wants his work to be used in everyday life, but also what he wants his life to look like in the future as an independent maker and an educator, he's been able to make some decisions that, well, on the surface, could appear completely nonsensical if you're only listening to what the internet is shouting at you. One last thing before we dive into this insightful conversation. The technology fates had their sights set on me this last week. So as Sam and I recorded this interview, if you notice the sound change a couple of times, or if there's a brief period of a bit of weird timing in the conversation, that was me. That was the internet and the connection and the technology and all the things. So I just want to give a big shout out to Sam for being incredibly flexible and patient amidst it all. My friends, you would be amazed at what it takes for all of these interviews to actually make it to your earbuds. So, enough of those logistics. This conversation with Sam is sure to open up some new thoughts and ideas for you. So, let's get on with the show. Welcome to the Maker's Playbook, the podcast where we talk all about what it's really like to make a living from the things you make. I'm your host, Rebecca Ikes-Gara.
Hey, Sam. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
This is where we do that really awkward intro right away.
Oh, well, let's do it.
For people who can't see you. I mean, you can't see me because technology is a beautiful, horrible thing. How would you introduce yourself?
Okay, so hi, everybody. My name's Sam Lopez. I am a ceramics instructor and a potter living here in San Diego, California.
Very small cost of living for a potter. No big deal. Easy.
Oh, yeah. Oh, joy. Yeah, if you want to be a potter, you should definitely move to San Diego because it's probably the cheapest place to try to make a living from your pots. It's really reasonable.
You pay for that 75 degrees and sunny all year long is what the situation is.
Yeah, but it is worth it. My wife and I made a conscious decision to stay here because we have a little one and we want her to grow up in a really fun place. So it's a decision that we made together as a family, and regardless of how difficult it is, we're going to try our best to stick it out. So
Oh, I say it with utmost jealousy, particularly when my friends who live in San Diego text me in like February as they're walking down the sidewalk, and I'm like, "You're a jerk."
it's definitely, well, you pay for it. So there's also that. You could opposite and show us or show you our either rent or mortgages if you have one of those, and our energy bills, and send those to you. And then you'll be like, okay, not so bad.
Well, on that happy note, I always joke that I feel like this podcast is like the downer podcast of all makers. Like, let's talk about how rough it is.
Oh, no, but it's like, it's all in fun, really. I mean, you pick a place to live, you deal with it.
Exactly. There's pros and cons to anywhere, honestly. And that's the same with business, with life, with every decision. I feel like that's what so much about what we're talking about in the community now is like, there's not a right or wrong answer to this. There's just a choose your own adventure. And that then has repercussions. If you choose this way, this happens. If you choose that way, that happens. What you
Exactly.
gonna do?
Hmm.
So how long have you been in clay, both making and teaching?
Making, do you want me to start at the very beginning? Because I am,
Sure.
well,
Were
if
you
I go all the way back, I started in high school, and I'm one of those
Mhm.
lucky kids that got to go all 4 years of high school in ceramics. And
That's
it was
amazing.
just, yeah, super, super lucky. I mean, our programmer is really cool. And without getting too distracted, it's just my teacher was really great and he offered a lot of freedom. And it was just a fun class to be in when I was in high school. You know, I could go there during my lunch break, and that's often what I did. And I made pots, and there was
Mhm.
never really any pressure. And that's what I love so much about it. But I kind of forgot about ceramics after high school. So that would have been in 2001 or 2, I think was my first ever ceramics class. And then I took a couple years off after high school. And then in 2010, I got back into it as a student a little bit more seriously and have been doing it since then. In regards to teaching, I've been teaching at the community college level since 2017. I started in the
Okay.
spring, and I've been doing that ever since. So now I'm in my 5th year. I just finished my 5th year of teaching. I've done part-time and full-time teaching in the community college system. And then I've also taught, I don't anymore, but I taught for 6 years at a little institution called Idlewild Arts. During the year, it's a full-time boarding arts high school. And in the summertime, they do a combination of adult education and education for like middle school and high school students. And I taught there in their ceramics department for 6 years.
I just didn't even know. It's so funny how, like, depending on where you grew up or where you live, like, the only kind of boarding intensive arts high school I think of in the US is Juilliard, right? Like, I didn't even
Yes.
know that place existed.
Yeah, so on the West Coast, they're the only boarding arts high school west of, geez, I really don't know, but definitely the only one in the
The
West.
Mississippi?
Probably, honestly, and it's an amazing high school, absolutely amazing program. They have, in regards to music, and I think from listening to your podcast for so long, you were into music as well,
Yep,
so you might
yep,
know this. Um,
back in the
but
day.
so for the high school students, it's such a strong program. They have the number one acceptance rate into Juilliard every year, which is kind of amazing.
Wow.
And so they have like a really strong dance program. They have a really strong, well, just music in general, but they do film production there and they do all the visual arts as well. It's a really cool high
Holy
school
cow.
where kids get to go. And then in the summertime, they open it up to the adults, and we'll have like 4 weeks of adult classes. And it's sort of a mini version of like the Aramonts and Haystacks sort of situation where we get artists that come in for a week and they'll teach the 1 week intensive workshops. And we'll have like a thrower, a
Yeah,
hand builder, and a sculptor. So it's a really fun place to be. We're lucky to have it so close here in
that's
Southern California.
that's amazing. And then also your history kind of explains the skill set that I see happening on Instagram and why I've kind of I've joked back and forth with you a little bit in the DMs in terms of like, you're saying, "Well, I'm working up to launching," and I'm looking at your throwing going, "I think you've worked up to it. I think you're there. Like, let's do this thing, Sam."
Yeah, and that's a big challenge. So to go back to like how this teaching has been going on, I'm right in the middle of a shift of where at the
Mhm.
former college I was at, I taught there for 4 years, and the trajectory I was on, at least I thought, was this, or I mean, a lot of us that have our terminal degrees that want to go into education, you get your foot in the door, maybe you get an extra class, and then maybe you work your way up into a temporary position. And I was on that road where
Mhm.
I started with one class, then I got two classes, and then I was teaching fall, winter, spring, summer. And so it's essentially like a full-time job, and then I actually got a 1-year contract full-time. And, things were starting to feel like they were happening, and then the full-time position flew. And for anybody that's trying to get into education, what you'll find out is that the talent pool is just incredible. And no matter how much experience you have and no matter how motivated and enthusiastic you are, there's someone probably out there that's got 20 years experience with a whole lot of credentials to back it. So anyway, I ended up out of that school.
Yeah.
I'm not teaching there anymore. And I'm at a school now here in San Diego called Palomar College. And at this school, you're only allowed a maximum of one class as an adjunct. So this is some more education for those wishing to teach. Like some schools will allow you two classes, which is actually pretty good. And then other schools will only allow you one class, and it's a district by district basis. So now with this all like my point of all of this is for the first time since graduate school, I'm actively pursuing a studio practice that is actually supportive for my bills. I'm actually trying to make
Hmm.
money off of it now. And that's what this whole launch process has been is just understanding how to use social media to my advantage. How can I use all the education, like thoroughly use all the education I have had and try to implement that into some sort of business model. And honestly, like right now would be my 1 month of official business ownership, which is kind of funny to think about because I think a lot of what I was doing before is I was teaching and that was giving me such a reliable income stream that I wasn't going down to the studio to make 200 things. I was going down to the studio to work for 3 or 4 hours really slowly and mindfully and churn out work that kind of was very time consuming and more indicative of what I was doing as a student and what was being represented in like some of the galleries that were sharing my work. So it was a lot of time intensive stuff that wasn't really ever going to pay the bills. So this shift has been, okay, how do I actually think about production and how do I like try to have or try to at least set goals that are going to have some revenue coming in. And that's what this whole thing has been. It's been a really interesting challenge to first actually give myself a working schedule rather than what I would consider used to be probably a more leisure style of working. I was really
Hmm.
spoiled and yeah, that work would have never. So if you scroll back a couple years on my feed, you'll notice that it was all pictures before Reels was there, and all the work was time consuming. And there's no way I would have been able to make money. It was all like one kiln load. I was polishing the outside of every single piece. I work in porcelain, and I was basically cold working like you would glass the outsides of pieces. And like one small kiln load would take 2 weeks to polish, and you can't do that unless you're going to sell really expensive. So this has been a fun little launch experimentation. It's like my first iteration of what could potentially be production work.
Which is, you make a great point in that, like, intentionally choosing to go down the route of production means you're selling in a different way because you could have stuck with, the 2 weeks of polishing, but then the audience you would have to go after and the way you would have to sell that work, presumably, would be pretty different.
That's still something I'm really battling with because I have collectors that have paid a lot of money for some of my work. And I'm kind of on the trajectory of continually, and this isn't a go against every business model and practice I know, but I'm going to try my best to continually lower my prices. It's just a matter of how I can do it and actually find a way to not feel like I'm undercutting my former clients. I want them to feel
Hmm.
like they're respected. So the work is going to change as a result of that too.
Yeah.
And that's another path that I'm on. It's just like figuring out how I could scale up so that I could afford that price cut rather than stay so small. And like the price of my pots right now is what I would still consider expensive. If I was selling them all, it'd be cool. But I think just in terms of what makes me feel comfortable as a business owner and how I want people to use the work, I want them to not
Mm.
feel like they can't use my pots because that's been a big issue in the past. It's like, do you make your pots for the mantle or do you make your pots for the kitchen cabinets? That's a common question that we get asked.
Yeah. And so was that desire for the functional the impetus of thinking about a lower price point? Or my next question in my brain, and maybe you answered this, but I just want to be clear, was to kind of walk us through that decision process to say, because I think a lot of people will be surprised by this, because everybody on the planet is told, raise your prices, raise your prices, raise your prices, right?
Yeah, and I think it's something to do with how I picture my pots being used. Like, do you want your pots to be the everyday use pots, or do you want your pots to be the only you could see this, but for the viewers, I have a shelf behind me that's full of pots that I've collected that some of them are quite expensive. And I only
Mhm.
use them like a couple times a year. Maybe if I get like a really nice bottle of scotch or something, I'll like I have a Chris Gustin little cup here. And like maybe I'll break that out for, like one drink.
Anniversary type date night situation.
And yeah, my perspective is like, do I want to be, and there's like Chris Gustin, that he's only one example, but it's like I hold him in such high reverence that I know I'm not going to buy another one of those. And so I myself handle it very differently than something I buy that's in like 40, 50, $60 range that's a little bit more comfortable to use every day. And that's something that that's been on my mind for a long time, is like, rather than someone own a mug of mine, I would really love people to own a full set of dishes of mine. And it's just a slightly different way of thinking, but I love that too. And I mean, my perspective has changed so much since being a graduate student to now, and just like living every day and noticing the things that I purchase and want to use and feel comfortable using. So I'm noticing, okay, I use this mug a lot. What about that mug? Why am I using it so much? And maybe it was like a price point thing. Maybe it's just about the maker and I really love the way it feels and the way it functions. But like all those sort of things are tying into my brain. And I'm a very casual person in real life. So I feel like my pots should represent that as well. And that's just like a personal
Mm.
opinion. My favorite pots, and it's kind of funny, or some of my favorite pots, I should say, are like all the bone china pieces that you find in like classic greasy American diners. Like those really chunky, super thick,
Those
though, like
really, really thick
they're
coffee
terrible.
mugs. Like, there's like 6 ounces of coffee inside, even though the outside silhouette looks like it's going to be a 12-ounce mug.
Exactly. And it's like, I love those. And maybe it's nostalgia because when I think of those objects, I think of like all the times my dad was always done with work by like 10 o'clock in the morning, or he works in the dairies. It's a different
Hmm.
subject. But so
Okay.
oftentimes
Yep.
he'd be like,
Yep.
hey, you want to go for breakfast? And I'm like, yes. And so much of those objects is tied with the memory of having breakfast with my dad. And maybe that's why I like them so much. And yeah, they're super awkward to use, but they get the job done so well. Like there's not very many objects that you can throw into a busser's bucket and just let them stack and clink
Yeah.
around and have the confidence that they're not going to break. So like a lot of the work I make now, it's all porcelain, but a lot of it still speaks to that like thicker, maybe you can drive a nail in with it, but being very intentional with the weight of something. And like the weight of my objects is, it's like comforting to me because they're a little heavier. And the tendency as we gain skill is to always go thinner and thinner and thinner and lighter. And it's always like this battle of like skills versus intention. And, like once upon a time, I was that paper thin porcelain potter. But I feel like as I'm aging, I'm going backwards and trying to be a little bit more mindful with how something actually feels and the longevity of that object in someone's home, and like having it last them an entire lifetime with casual use rather than like hand wash only, stick it in the drying rack, that kind of thing. I want it to just be able to take abuse, but also be beautiful at the same time. So that's where it's going. And if I can cut that price back, then maybe it'll just enter more people's homes too.
I love this pivot so much for so many reasons, but to stay in my lane and be the pragmatic marketer that everybody expects me to be, it's the way you're talking about the intentionality behind this decision is something I found when trying to sell services as a photographer. I could and can sell someone a wedding album because I feel so passionately about the importance of the longevity of that type of like tangible thing, to
Hmm.
where that was something that I could, reverse to what we're talking about, but I could increase the price of an album well before I was comfortable increasing the cost of my hourly service, right? Because
Oh,
it was
yeah.
something I was
Hmm.
so passionate about. And so, like, hearing the intentionality you have behind these decisions is, for me, what I can kind of imagine in the future is it makes it easier in a certain way for you to sell pieces because you believe in it that much more, as opposed to, I think what so many makers are worried about when it comes to selling their work is everybody feels like sales is slimy, right? Because we have
Oh,
this
yeah.
stereotype example of the used car salesman and whatever. And I always get on a soapbox of like, sales and marketing is only slimy if you're doing something disingenuous. Like if you're doing
Yeah.
something you don't believe in, then yeah, it's going to feel gross. But when you tell me this story about having breakfast with your dad every morning, I get goosebumps and I'm like, shit, did Sam sell out of his mugs already? Because I need to go buy one now from that last shop update that I saw. Like that's a completely different meaning behind it.
Yeah. And to your point, this is something that only comes across so well through talking. And something that
Mhm.
I'm learning is like, how do you tell that story through words and use it on social media? That's something still, I'm not a marketer. I went to school for ceramics, and my
Yep.
education didn't include any marketing or business, entrepreneurship, anything. So it's all come later.
Mm.
And you're right, though. It's like being able to talk about these things, and like so much about selling anything is about the education aspect. That's how I've
Mhm.
always saw it. It's like, and I can always advocate for someone else better than I can advocate for myself. That's just been something, I don't know, it's been a part of me for a while. It's like, I don't want to sell you my mug, but I can bust out one of my friends' mugs and I can probably make you go out to their shop and buy one, you know? It's always like on the personal thing, and that's just something I need to get over. It's funny because I'm so grateful for the people that have chosen to live with my work and the people that use it. It's funny because intention versus what actually happens is a totally different thing. It took my mom up until like 2 years ago to ever use something that I've made besides putting it on a shelf or a cabinet or something like that. So once she started using something, I use that as my meter for, okay, she's actually comfortable using it now. She doesn't feel like she's going to break it, like all those sort of things. I feel like I'm doing something right if it has sort of that gauge at least, will mom use it instead of put it on a wall?
I love that. It's so funny because I want to like call up your mom and be like, You have access to him all the time. So don't worry because I'm pretty sure, like I've got a feeling there's a mom discount if something breaks to be able to give it back to her. But oh man.
My parents get anything that they want, and they're still like, it's funny because my last shop update, I saw a purchase and it was for my mom. I'm like, geez, mom, like just ask me for something. But it feels so good to also have someone willing, like in your family, willing to support.
Yeah. We were talking when we very first launched, like that, our stand in right now is just having an Etsy shop as we get the Caratera brand going and much the same that you're doing with your Instagram. And I was talking about you have to start getting sales so you can have reviews so that you can get the algorithm going. So then my mom was like, okay, well, I'll go get what I want to get off of Etsy. I was like, no, like, I'm not going to give Etsy the 6.5% if I don't have to. It's just like,
And that's the other thing too. It's like I'm going through a website and it's the same thing. It's like credit card purchases, or I mean, they take 3%, the website platform takes their
mhm.
percentage. It's like all these things. Like, I love that you're supporting me, but we could do this a better way.
Right, right. Oh man, I love it. I think next time we're gonna have to have your mom and my mom together on the podcast, and we'll just switch roles. I won't have to be there. We'll just let them interview each other. It'll be great.
Oh yeah, my mom could talk. She'll do
Oh
it.
yes.
So you just did your first shop update that like you're kind of
Yep.
going about the approach now instead of that high end fine art, don't touch it ever world. We're going down the world of Instagram and shop updates.
Yeah, I mean, that it seemed to be the model, and, I've been listening to all kinds of podcasts. That's when I found you,
Yeah.
honestly. I found you back in, I wanna say it had to be before Christmas, and then I just listened to them all. But I found you, and then I think in one of them, you may have mentioned someone else's podcast, and 2 separate business podcasts that were more geared towards launching and, like, understanding that. So it was my first time ever doing a shop update officially. I've always sold stuff through Instagram, and I'd be like, hey, I have some work available. Never went very well because it was all terribly planned. And then this one actually had some intention behind it. And I've learned a lot because I was doing this it was when Reels was first introduced, and I had some time. So I was making all the work that I was making. And I kind of like, I peaked too soon because, yeah, different
Were you
story.
the cool kid in high school? Is that what I'm learning?
So I peaked. My profile was getting like, it kind of got crazy for a second, and then all of a sudden it just squashed. And then
Mm.
I was like a month out from my drop, and I was like, well, this is a bummer. Yeah. So it kind of went insane because I've had Instagram forever. I was always very casual with it because I wasn't trying to make money from it. So I would like post once a week. I was that person. Occasionally I would post something and like share it. And it was like largely I would share pictures of yeah, it was very casual. And then this time I was trying to be intentional about it. And then it actually was working. I was like, oh my gosh, this is working. And all of a sudden there was like this huge drop off. And I'm like, no, the pots are ready now, everybody. But anyway, it went okay. I'm happy. I'm not going to complain. I mean, I'm not one of those people that sells out pots every drop. Maybe in the future, but like for now, it's funny because this system's working and it's all I have right now. So that's all I'm going to do. And because there's no in person markets currently happening in San Diego. So I have to wait until the winter for that to happen. So my next kind of iteration is to like right now, I'm working towards like setting up my small studio space to be able to accommodate even more work. So that's all my concentration is on now, so that when the time comes, my production can go up higher or can be a
Yep.
little bit more productive. And the issue that like this whole challenge, I mean, I live in San Diego. We kind of joked about it at the beginning of this, but it's insanely expensive to have studio space or to even be a community member at a studio. It's really expensive. And there's luckily some really great potters here that have offered me to use their kilns. As an instructor at my college, I'm allowed to use the facilities for free. So, I mean, I don't know if that's public, but I'm allowed to use the space. But what that requires is I have to like pack all my greenware, put it in the car, drive it, 30 miles, unload it, fire it, glaze it, and then like pack everything back up, come home, photograph. It's like a really long system. So I'm just like, my goal this year is to just minimize as many hurdles as I need to take because I lose a lot of work in transport, unfortunately. So like this whole launch and I guess like small line of pots that I have, the whole purpose of it really, the goal of it is to have enough money so that I can actually get my own warehouse space. And what I want to do there is like ultimately I want to have a community studio that's mine where I could, have it. And it's funny because I
Well,
think
you
the
have the
trajectory
teaching
is
background. That makes sense to
yeah,
me as far as
I think the trajectory for a lot of people is you start in that community college or the community space, wherever it is, and then you're like, "Oh, I wanna do this," and then you bring it all home, and then there's no community, and then it's like what you're doing, you have a community.
yeah.
And, like, for me, so much what ceramics has done for me as a person is like out in the wild, I am very shut off. I like walk with my head down, mind my own business type of person. But for some reason or another, being in a clay studio is what actually opens me up and makes me want to talk to people. It's the only place that's ever really done it. There's a lot of camaraderie in there. I just love the people. I love sharing things with people. So like I don't want a space that's just for me. I want a space that I could produce at, but I also want to be able to teach people because I need like some sort of connection. And ultimately what I want to do, like my ultimate goal is to have it be successful enough to where like my wife can come work with me. She's a manager at a hospital, but her expertise, like it'll take her out of a more stressful environment. My daughter can grow up there. That type of thing, that's kind of like where my mind's going, where I would rather not that I don't like, I love teaching in the community college. It's a great I mean, you meet some really amazing people, but there's no guarantee that you have a job, especially as like me, I'm an adjunct. So, like, you fall under this tier of who's been there the longest in terms of adjuncts, and like you get to pick classes that way. But then
Adjuncting too, like, one of the girls on my team from a photography standpoint adjuncts in Chicago, and like, I try and pay my people as best as I can at the highest level that we can, but I know that it's not, no one's retiring early in the arts, right? But she's told me, and I don't think I'm oversharing for her, that it's a better gig for her to have like a 4-hour shooting gig with us is better hourly pay than 4 hours at a major university. And we're talking like,
yeah.
you know, 4-year university, some people would say, "Oh, well, junior college versus university." Like, like we're like higher ed in the US is, let's just call it complicated.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm not complaining at all about like Southern California, the cost of living is more expensive, so some of the wages are a little bit higher. I've been pretty lucky with the schools I'm at, but I think like the other part of what I've come to realize as a teacher and like the responsibility that comes with being able to influence a young mind really
Mhm.
weighs on me. And this is part of why I want to do this whole business of having my own pottery and like actively pursuing it as a business is because as an instructor, it's like students come to me and they're asking me the questions of like, how do I do this? And for so long in education, the answer is more education, like, oh, you're in community college, transfer to university. That's where you'll get more education.
You got your bachelor's, go get your master's. And
Yeah. And that was kind of, that was my route, and I'm not complaining about my route. I'm so grateful for all the opportunities I've had up to this point. But I think I was like 22 when I went back to college. But like nowadays, pottery is so accessible, especially with the internet. And, there's people that are offering apprenticeships where you can actually learn and get that production experience if that's what you want. Or you could work with people that are doing artistic high-end pottery. And it's like, or whatever you want to do within ceramics. But I never had like concrete answers for, okay, this is how you'll start a business, or like at least the steps. And, this is partly like what I've learned a lot through you and through just a number of different podcasts is, like you have your website set up. Are you all set up for taxes? When do you want to launch? What type of work do you want to make? Who's your clients? Who's your target market? All this stuff. Like, how do you get that information? And the only way for me to actively be able to teach someone that and give them what I would feel like some sort of timeline for potential success is to like actively live it myself and like hold myself accountable. Okay, I joke that I'm my own apprentice right now.
yeah,
And that's what really gets me into the studio. It's like, oh, but I'm tired. I've been with the baby all day long, and maybe it's 7 p.m. and it's my first break. It's like, well, you got to go downstairs and work, bud. No
yeah.
one else is going to do it for you. So it's a lot of it is like taking ownership and just feeling like I'm not going to be able to educate and give someone a responsible answer unless I've actually had some concrete knowledge. Because, like, at least in academia, what I was trying to do was, there's a handful of these ceramic art galleries that are trickled around the United States. And, a lot of really prominent potters use all these galleries. And, like that was my route before. It was like, okay, they sell all the type of work that I appreciate. So I want to just try to be included with them. And then after a while, I was realizing, wow, I can't really afford to do this. Like if I was relying on this, I can't afford to do it. Just like my schedule and just my life, I just couldn't manage it. So now it's a matter of trying to do it all on my own. But yeah, to circle back, the teaching, especially at community college level, because you get a vast array of students anyway. But I just want to do my best for them, and like telling someone to go to art school. Because I remember a student asked me to be like, they looked up to me, and it was like a huge compliment that they appreciated me and wanted at least like my blessings for them going to school. They're asking me to write letters of recommendation to all these art schools that they potentially would get into. And some of these art schools are like $70,000-$80,000 a year.
And that's without your apartment and your food, like that's just to walk into a room, classroom.
And I tell them, I'm like, I'm not going to write you a letter of recommendation there. I'm sorry, because it just goes against everything in like, I want you to be successful, and I have nothing against anybody that chooses to go to art school, but it's like 4 years is what, 290, $300,000.
At least.
So I think of that as like, can you take a fraction of that money, and what can you do if you just invested in yourself with that amount of money? Like, what would that look like? Because even 100 grand, that's a lot of money, but that's a lot of studio. If it's ceramics specifically, like you can buy all your dream equipment for 100 grand.
Right. You're not even buying used equipment at that point. You're like, let me top of the
Yeah, you can buy
line,
the
brand
highest end of the
new.
high end, and you can buy multiples. In my perspective, I'm trying to start a studio. That's like multiple kilns, multiple wheels, and rent for a whole year.
Yep. In San Diego. This is
In
not in
San Diego.
Iowa.
Yeah, exactly. So like I think of them like, look what you could do with that
Yep.
amount of money, and you have a business model like right off the bat that would be a turnkey successful business as long as you have the ability to be able to teach them folks.
You very kindly referenced learning some of the stuff from the podcast and the stuff I'm putting out there, but your experience in school having not been taught it. And I had great professors. Don't get me wrong, I'm good friends with some of them still, and they might be listening. Hi, Jordan. But, we didn't learn business. We didn't,
Mm-mm.
it was also, I was coming out of school at 2008, 2009. The years prior, it was presumed that you did all the things. The resume was perfect. I had a 4.0. I had an internship. I had all the things. So it was
Mhm.
just assumed that you'd go out there and get a job from somebody. And I think that it's an interesting space to see as I've been teaching, like one off, been invited into classrooms over the last couple of years. It has amazed me to see the awareness students have now around the realities of the world, whether they're
Yeah.
already in a 4-year program and they're just aware of what they're facing coming out, or whether they are pre higher ed and kind of saying, hold on a second, let me get strategic about this. Do I actually really need to go down this road in order to do like what I want to do? What do I really need? And it's so smart. They're just so much farther ahead than I was.
I have a lot of confidence in many of the students that I get. I look at them like, wow, you're going to be fine. You're going to be just fine. But it's also like my education was, I had an amazing education. San Diego State is where I went for both. Like, I have a bachelor's degree in applied design and I have a master's MFA in ceramics. And my primary professor the whole time was Richard Burkett. And he is, if folks out there don't know, but he's a glaze genius. I mean, he wrote a program himself, he did all the code himself. It's called Hyperglaze. But so, like, my education and what I wanted out of my education was all the technical knowledge. So, like, I wanted to know how to do as many different things with the materials and the equipment as possible. And luckily, that's what I got. And I'm so grateful. And a lot of opportunities have come from it. But taking, like, now, I just see it as I would have been able to use that. And I still do use a lot of that information in my classes because I teach all levels of ceramics. But I want to be able to have a community studio where I just design a college curriculum for everyday people.
That sounds like a dream. As the
And
person, as the community of studio person, I'm like, okay. I mean, I wanted to be in San Diego anyways. In can we do this in January, February, and March? That's my.
yeah, yeah, all year long. And it's like really what this all has stemmed from too is like exiting formal education and trying to do something on my own is having a family really kind of spearheaded that. The pandemic really spearheaded that. I mean, a lot of people had some time to like take a breath and think. And that's one thing. It's like I have a 1-year old. I can't bring her to school with me as an instructor. As a student, I could have access to daycare, but as an instructor, you don't. It's kind of weird. And then just want her to like she could wander the studio. She loves like give her a ball of clay. She's so happy. She'll run around and just laugh. And I want to be able to bring her and like so like many of us that are all involved in ceramics. Yes, there's some aspect of it where like I taught a lot of night classes and I've had everybody in my classes from like 18-year-olds fresh out of high school, retired principal or retired English professor. I've had them all. And everybody ends up realizing by the end of the semester that they need it.
Mm.
Not only because, yes, sitting at a potter's wheel can really make time fly by and clear your head. And there's that aspect of it, like with our mental health, but there's also the community aspect of it of like, hey, we're all learning this together. We all started the start of the semester with a lot of mess ups. And we've gotten to this place where we've increased our skill set and then like confidence comes from that and you have this desire to like keep going. And this is another aspect of why I want my own studios because as a community college instructor, I'm only allowed to have students for a maximum of 4 semesters. And then I have to tell them like, oh, here's another place you can potentially go or it's a really difficult trajectory for them because then they feel like they can't take classes anymore and they have no place to go. And that's always been like the hardest struggle is to say bye to students that I want. Like, I wish I could keep them forever, because it's like, I feel like I get to get them to this point of like very intense focus, very intense enthusiasm. And then it's like, okay, bye.
And pottery is such a resource driven medium, right? Like you need the access to the things. And 2 years is such a short time in the life of pottery. It feels long, but you're just getting going.
Yeah. My brain's full of so many different things at the moment because it's like, I'm trying to start a real production line
Mhm.
that's at scale. And that part of all of this is meant to be like the main source of where students can come to learn for free or get paid to learn how to make pots that for like the young or just anybody that wants to do it for a living, and like provide a resource or an outlet for that rather than having this. I mean, cost of ceramics is really expensive and we're really lucky to be able to ever say that we've done it because it's like the studio that you've gone into costs a lot of money to get put together and you likely paid a lot for those classes. And I always just feel so grateful to be in the spaces that I've been in and to be able to, I feel like that's like the best part of being a part of a community too, is just like, hey, I'm providing this outlet for you and to have like no age limit on the whole thing,
Mhm.
because I think it's important that anybody gets to do it. I mean, like
Yep.
how often it's so rare. Like I've taught seventh and eighth graders before, and it's like there's no way you're gonna forget about this in
Yeah.
your life. You know, they spent 2 weeks with me, like a 2 week long intensive workshop as a seventh or eighth grader, and I can't imagine that experience is gonna be forgotten, especially when you have the object to reference. You know, like it's something that's always so powerful with ceramics is that we could, I again referencing this little shelf behind me with all these potters. I can grab I'm never gonna forget any of these potters, you know? Even no, as much as my mind will let time have me forget about them, as soon as you pick it up, you're like snapped right back into that moment of who that person is, especially if you have some sort of personal connection with them outside of just purchasing something online. But anyway, I think I'm getting sidetracked. I'll keep going.
No, I love it because I love how much intention what I'm really impressed by, and I don't see many people being able to sit in both of these spaces, is you're being really particular about what you're trying right now so that you can look at what's working, right? So switching to the Instagram world, switching to the shop update and the production and that price point that we started the conversation with, but having this kind of experimental mindset behind it of like, okay, I'm doing this shop update right now for this purpose. And like you're being really particular in small chunks. And at the same time, you have this big, beautiful goal that's so much larger than Instagram post, shop update, rinse and repeat, Instagram post, shop update, rinse and repeat. That, there's so much intentionality behind that that I wish I could just like fuse into so many other people because I see that as the way really to drive success forward instead of, kind of taking a bowl of spaghetti and throwing it against the wall and seeing what happens and then being frustrated that you're not getting any traction and all of the things that come from that.
Yeah, I think it's also like being able to like dip your toe into understanding the responsibilities that come with it. I've heard it a lot too, where people they want to blow up, but then as soon as they find themselves in the life of like accommodating all these pre-orders or what have you, then they're not satisfied or they're not getting that like same initial buzz from all the production. So I'm trying to be mindful about that too. Like, okay, like how's this feel? And like, all the people that I look up to in terms of like business folk, like none of them are in ceramics, but like trying to take lessons from successful entrepreneurs that are like really, I guess, like what you're saying, like more vision oriented. And I feel like that creates so much more motivation than the initial high of I sold a mug, you know? I just understand now. I mean, I'm 35 now. It's taken me this long to understand, like, okay, what really makes me feel good and what do I need out of ceramics? Because there's been times where it's like really knocked me down and made me not want to do it anymore. And like I'm pretty well invested at this point, you know? It's been a
Yeah.
long time. And, it's like I'm so thankful of my wife. Like she's like, you got this. You have so much experience and you've learned so much. You could take your education and like, let's see what you could do with it. So I'm like so happy that I have someone like her in my corner. But it's also like this understanding like what I want as well, but also what I want for my daughter and a 10-year plan maybe like for my wife and I, and just thinking how do we want to spend our time and how do we want to spend our life? I think that's a really important thing or question to ask yourself. And for me personally, it's like surrounded by folks that love pottery, that want to just get better, like regardless of where they at or where they are in their lives, you know? I mean,
Yeah.
it's been really incredible to have like lawyers and architects and what have you in my class, like other professionals, and just say like, "Hey, I really needed this, and thank you so much for what you've provided." I mean, that is beyond anything you can ever ask for. I know that I need that connection. I know that I need to make things. It's just something that's been in me since I was a little kid. My dad is my very first teacher. I mean, that's a whole, we can get into that if you want, but understanding that I need to make things and like why I want to make them and what kind of community I want to live in, like,
Mhm.
ultimately. And it's for me, it just has to be ceramics. And I'm going to do as much as I can within my own power to at least bootstrap this idea to come to fruition. I mean, if it takes me 5 years, that's cool. If it takes me 2 years, even better. If it takes me a year to open up a small space, then, when it comes, it's going to come, but it's the goal and it's the only thing that I'll settle for at this point. It's like what I'm going to do. And it's like filling up wear boards. You just do it.
But I love that the point as far as like having something that gets you through the highs, which is also then the lows, is absolutely crucial. Absolutely crucial. And I, for myself too, when something finally clicked where I could like get the long term vision, and I think for people who are kind of, for the longest time, I was the person who would hear someone talk about that and then get really stressed because I didn't necessarily have that vision. And for my story, at least, this might not be the case for everybody, but for me, part of that came from realizing finally during COVID, when we all stopped for 2 seconds, that the goals I was going after weren't actually what I loved, weren't actually what was in alignment with my own values and my life, to where like I was stuck on trying to find that 3 year, 5 year, 10 year vision because the route I was on, we weren't on the right road. And so then once that kind of got sorted out, that vision came into place like boom, click, done. I just accidentally quoted Hamilton, like that with some of those experiences and different things, like then it kind of clicks together. But the other thing that I was thinking of, that was just a whole personal aside, but as you were talking about getting through, having that vision, that goal that gets you through those highs and lows, is a conversation we've been having in our community recently about like, what is your actual conversion? What do you really need? Because a lot of people immediately default to, I want to have 10,000 followers on Instagram. And it was kind of like, okay, but why? Why do you need? And Instagram has stuck into our brains that that's kind of the goal, or that's like people will perceive you as professional or successful or whatever is it, that number. And I wanted everybody to back up a little bit to say, like, do you actually know your numbers? To say, like, Sam's got a goal of opening a community studio. How much is the right amount of square footage to get off the ground in San Diego? How many kilns do you need? How many wheels do like looking at the hard numbers to say, okay, therefore you have to earn this much money. Therefore you have to sell this many pots. The number of people from your Instagram that actually came to the website and bought a pot. Okay, now we have your Instagram follower goal number that's rooted in reality of your own life,
Mhm.
rather than putting so many hours of your life in Instagram to make Instagram more money.
Yeah, since last month was the first time since I've been making pots where I've been capturing emails,
Yep.
which is kind of like so silly of me. I mean, I've been at it for so long, and then everybody's like, "Oh yeah, have an email list," and I was like, "Nah," I was so reliant on in-person sales, and just that was my thing, and I wasn't relying on my pots to make me an income. So like now it's like, okay, how do I do this? And yeah, just navigating a business in general, trying to learn from other folks, like, okay, what have you done that's worked and what's successful? And there seems to be like, well, luckily there's so much information out there that is good information, not just this, follow me for more and I'll give you all the info.
I made $10,000 in 2 weeks. Come follow me. Like, what does that even mean? What does that even mean?
But Instagram, it's like it's good and bad all at the same time. But I've actually learned what's been good for me is to like emotionally disconnect from it and use it as a tool rather than as any sort of like I'm not trying to gain social recognition from my platform anymore. It's more like recently I'm just trying to like share people with what I want to do and then also educate because I think that's part of just who I am is like, okay, you want to see this? Like, there's so many fun techniques to do with ceramics. It's that like all my students get so excited about when they first see them. And so now, like, my goal, if we're going to go to like social media goals, is to just like share those, it's like, here's some fun stuff.
You mean like folding down a 4-inch rim to a 90-degree angle the other day? I was like, oh, okay, okay.
Those are like, you can call those charismatic pottery posts.
Like cocktail party pottery.
Yeah, it's stuff that can be in 2 seconds, you grab someone's attention, and I've always kind of laughed because I'm accepting it more and more now, like, okay, the internet likes a certain thing, so you're either gonna, like, do it or you're not,
Yep.
and if you wanna grow your page, you're either gonna do it or you're not. So, I've just accepted it, and so it's like, I don't make those bowls, and it's funny, I call them bougie bowls just because it's literally, like, you're gonna spend, like, 15 to $25 on a brownie, and that's what it's served in? And I always joke with my students, like, no one has these at home, but it's always at some restaurant. You can go to Applebee's and they'll serve you up a brownie in it. But there's also like really high end fine dining places that use them. And don't get me wrong, they make a beautiful frame for food. And I think if you're like being intentional with how you frame that food, it's like they're an amazing object. So there's that too. But for some reason, they're like laying down a rim. People seem to like it.
Also, the phrase you just used now, I feel like you need to record it again, and then it needs to be laid down with a beat at the same time, because that's like the most accurate mesh of like laying down a rim, laying down a beat. Like,
Oh,
now
learning
I'm
how to be
making
a
I'm making bad puns, so I'm like, and this is where we wrap it up before the dad jokes come out even worse.
I'm holding stuff back.
I love it. Well, we could clearly chat forever, and I want to be mindful of your time. What? Gosh, this is such a big question.
Oh, go ahead. My daughter's sleeping, so we're good.
We're on borrowed time then. No,
Yeah. Oh, I got like a whole another hour.
nice. That's a good napping situation.
Oh yeah, she'll nap 3 hours at least.
This sounds like black magic to me. I'm not yet a parent, but from the nannying and the babysitting, I'm like, really? 3 hours? That's
I know every parent's gonna say this, but she's pretty awesome. We got lucky. We got like amazing eater and sleeper. It's like I'll take it.
done. Done. Fantastic. What do you feel like? What I'm trying to think about is, so many people who are going to be sitting in their own studio with the headphones in thinking like, yes, I want to make this shift and I want to go after it and do this thing for a living. What you are learning right now in this unique transition period of making this shift over to full-time making away from teaching, that may be something that's different than you expected or what have you.
I mean, I'm gonna try to like give an answer that isn't also like I don't want to be cynical about it. If I had like a young student or any student that really wanted to, I would try my best, like time accommodating. This is something also that's just part of adjunct life and like being a parent is I don't have when I was full time, I had this luxury of time because I had the resources to be able to stay at school longer. Right now, it costs me money to be at school. So I can't just be there to like really get involved with students anymore, and this kills me. But anyway, now like knowing what it is, like a lot of what I learned is okay, break down what are you making at your job right now? If you have a job, if you live at home, like everybody has a different circumstance. And then understand like, okay, how much, and this is like a really common thread I think through a lot of these podcasts, is just like understand what that number needs to be. And then as long as you have that in mind and then just realize, okay, can you or how long will it take you to get to a point to where that's a doable or feasible option for you? And what does it look like? And then we would probably go through, like, I would love to help someone, like, okay, I set up a website. It's not super hard. We can talk about photography. I usually always photograph my students' work at the end of the semester, but talk about photography setups and whether or not that's going to cost a lot of money for them or whatever, website setup, how to capture, just like try to give them a real view of what the business actually will look like. Are you going to pay your taxes? Do you want to accept credit cards? Do you want to do it in person? Like just walk through like what their specific goal is and how they want to do it and whether or not it should be something that they do for a living or if it's just something that they need to allow themselves to just have fun with. I think that's a lot of things that the internet's taught us lately is that we have to monetize everything, like all our hobbies. And I joked with you about this a while back, but like I have a puppy now and I'm like, okay, do I just go down the rabbit hole of being a professional dog trainer? Because that's my mentality is to just like, okay, I'm going to,
Puppy influencer, like,
on a separate note though, I could post one video of my dog and get like 50,000 hits on it. And then it literally takes 5 seconds for me to do. And then I'll like do I'll record a video, edit it, do all these other things, voiceover, and then post it and get like nothing back from it. And I'm a little jealous of her sometimes. Wish I was, if I look like a puppy, man, my Instagram would be blowing up. So sorry, I digress. But like, I would just try to give a student like have a realistic expectation and then try to set up a plan to maybe get there that potentially costs them the least amount and maybe even get them into, and this is why I want to have like a working apprenticeship sort of thing where people can get paid like here, just if you want to get better at throwing, come learn how to throw and then eventually you'll just work up to getting paid to throw and you can decide whether or not that works for you or you can make things like there's plenty of people. It's so difficult. I don't know how I would approach it, honestly, because it's difficult, but it's also, you have to really want to do it. It's hard because someone 1 year into ceramics that's really motivated is a whole lot different than someone that's 15 years down the line and has already a realistic expectation of what it looks like and all the things that are involved and how it affects the rest of your life. Like really understanding like your wants and your needs and putting those together. Like it should be okay for people to just like, I like being in a community space, just working. And it's okay. I have a bunch of surplus pots. You can either like try to sell them to friends or you don't have to. You can give them away. A lot of people I know love being the gifter of pots, and there's a lot of people that love receiving those pots. Being like truthfully honest if it's something that you want to do. And I would try to see and get as many different perspectives as possible to see how other people have done it. There's this really great book, I'll just plug it, but it's called What Makes a Potter by Janet DeBoos. And it's functional pottery, like specifically in America. And it tells all these people's stories. Like a lot of these potters that I look up to, and I see them as like these prominent figures in the field, it's like maybe they were tile setters for 30 years, or carpenters. Like there's so many people that just loved it and kept at it. So like maybe just keep at it. That can be like the very basic level. It's just like keep at it. If you really love doing it, it'll tell you, like you'll know that you really love doing it because you'll be in it for a while. It's not something that needs to happen. I mean, the internet's telling us everything needs to happen tomorrow or today or yesterday. It can be really deceiving because then you can get what you think you want and you might not have wanted what you get. And so I think it's really informative to know that, like, oh, wow, this person's been in ceramics and I've known about them and they've been working for 40 years, but maybe their primary source of income wasn't pots, but now it is, like they worked up to whatever it was for their specific lives. And it also depends on where you want to live. Like, you don't live in San Diego to be a production or like to be a studio potter, although you can make it. Like, don't get me wrong, there's people here doing it, but like knowing that you can move to Montana, move to North Carolina, and you could really flourish rather than like scrap through it. What's been so surprising to me too is I've had students that have taken one class from me, beginning ceramics, and by summer they were teaching ceramics at summer camp. It's like amazing. And then I had another student during my first semester with her, went and got a job at a slip casting factory and was cleaning pieces straight out of the molds, like during my class. Like didn't even finish her first class, was already working as a professional person in ceramics. It's like, so you could do that too. Like you can just like go find a job at a production facility and just learn the skills and get paid to learn the skills. And you can decide, okay, maybe 8 hours a day is a little much for me, because I think a lot of people don't realize also like what a 40-hour work week feels like.
Yeah, the physicality of it.
Yeah, because I'm teaching a class next weekend that I started this with some of my advanced students, and now I've taught a few of them on Zoom, and then now I'm doing it in person, but they're timed classes. So where students are like throwing like large quantities of pieces, I actually set a timer and I give them a quantity, like weights that they're going to be throwing and shapes that they're going to be throwing for that set session. And to a lot of their surprise, they're like, whoa, more pots than I've ever made in an hour. Well, like sometimes will be like what I get back. And then also the next day, they're like, whoa, my back hurts or something hurts. And then we like talk about posture, what's your body doing when you're throwing, because there's a lot of other stuff that I see in studios is like just how people learn to throw. And then, do they have wrist issues, neck issues, back issues, hip issues? Like what's going on? A lot of my classes are directed that way too now, but I totally switched the subject on you. I'm sorry.
That's okay. That class will make Francesco very happy to hear that it actually exists in the world, because it's such a big deal with production. And if you do want to be a professional, and I mean, it all connects. It all connects. I'm going to dive down a whole nother rabbit hole if I go down there. But, like you were talking about, this originally started with the advice of like knowing what your needs are and what your wants are and the kind of the cost of living, and knowing how long it takes you to throw a pot. Can you throw fast enough to actually earn that, what you need in that amount of time? And so many things. But we did bring it back to where you choose to live, which was kind of like this perfect little bow. I was like, oh, look at us come full circle right there. Like, there we are. Oh my gosh. This is amazing. We could like, I can just be like, hold all the calls. We're going to talk for 4 more hours, guys. We're going to have a month on the podcast of Sam and Rebecca. Let's do it. I love it.
Hey, anytime.
Well, since we've talked about your Instagram so much, where can people come and see this laid down rim technique and all you're doing in porcelain?
My Instagram handle is Slop Studios. It's also my website, slopstudios.com. I have a TikTok, but I don't really post there. But that's only an abbreviation of Sam Lopez. And it's kind of silly that it's kind of
I
a
love
pun
it.
with ceramics at the same time that I'm trying to get away from, but it's there nonetheless. Yeah, so Slop Studios, you can come see what I'm doing. If you ever tried to Google Sam Lopez, you'll understand why I switched it to Slop Studios.
It's
There's a
like
lot of
Rebecca
us.
Marie photography. Yeah. Turns out Rebecca Marie photography wasn't that unique of a name, as it turns out.
Lopez is the most popular last name in California, Nevada, or I think like Utah and Arizona.
Arizona. Yep. I have to admit, I didn't put two and two together on the Slop Studios. And then when I saw it and realized, I was like, that is genius.
It was a joke because it was how much I could write my name on one of my ribs. I didn't leave enough room, and I was like, "Oh, that's kind of funny." So that became
Okay. Top high level marketing advice, naming your company from me and you right here. Like,
yeah, stumble upon it.
I mean, naming things is the worst, so I appreciate that. Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. We're gonna have to do this again because there's still so much we could have talked about.
Hey, anytime you want to talk, let me know. Thank you for having me. I mean, truthfully, thank you because, like I said, I found your podcast in my attempt to try to do things more mindfully, and it's really helped. I mean, you've directed me to some other folks, and so I'm just like, I'm thankful that you exist and you're doing what you're doing. And I've actually taken your photography class for those out there listening.
Woohoo! Thank you. No, that means the world. That means the world, seriously. The ceramics community is just an incredible place. Absolutely incredible
Indeed.
place. I love the intentionality that Sam is bringing to starting his business. And I hope that hearing about the context around how he's making these decisions will get you thinking creatively about your own goals. As always, if you're looking for support, we've got a whole crew of amazing independent makers ready to brainstorm right alongside you in the community. You can learn more about all that's going on in there over at makersplaybook.com/community, as well as take a little peek into what's actually going on because we currently have a 2-week free trial. So jump on in and see what's happening. But more timely than that, because the doors to the community are always open. We are there whenever you need support. Come join whenever you like. But in the conversation I just had with Sam, you might have heard him mention the photography course he took with me. The Maker's Photography Styling System is a 6-week course where I am super hands on, not only with video and written lessons and step by step practice exercises to immediately start improving your photographs, but also with direct feedback and question and answer sessions. Best of all, we are opening up this course again for the second time this year in just a few short weeks. And because I'm so hands on with it all, space is indeed limited. So if you want to make sure you don't miss out on this, because I don't do this course many times, this is probably the last time this year, visit makersplaybook.com/waitlist-NPSS, like Maker's Photography Styling System. It's a weird link, I know. So you can also just go to the show notes and click on it right there. But one more time, it's makersplaybook.com/waitlist-MPSS. When you go to that link, there's a form there for you to pop your email into it. And that way you will be on the wait list, which the makers on that list will get first dibs on a spot in the next cohort beginning at the start of September, before doors open to anyone else. Of course, as always, all of these links can be found in our show notes inside of your favorite podcast listening app, or you can pop on over to makersplaybook.com/podcast. All right, my friends, until next time, go get back to making your dreams a reality, because together, we've got this.